Hi there, I'm João Frigerio, and this is the second part of the interview with Fabio Coelho, president of Google Brazil. Here he talks about the changing consumer habits, the lessons that he learned from his mentors, and about the future of sports media rights. I asked him if Google could come to buy global rights of mega sports events such as the World Cup and the Olympic Games, and well, check it out and see what he said. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, and if you like it, please let your friends know. Give it a like below and share it with them. So let's not waste any time and go right to the interview. Before we talk about acquisition of sports rights that you just mentioned, I would like to talk more about the habits of the consumer that you also raised, that today is changing. It's very different than what it was. You gave a super nice and excellent really presentation at the event in Russia during the World Cup that you're kind enough to come and attend. It was super well received, and part of your presentation talked exactly about that, how habits are changing, how simply watching sport nowadays is not enough. People sort of want to participate, they want to, I think, create their own content, whether they're just watching or if they're attending an event. And I think that is something that is very relevant to Google and to YouTube, specifically when they post the videos that they create, but also about second or even third screen. I would like to understand sort of Google strategies, how you operate, how you fit into this new way to consume sports, especially because when we talk about second and third screens, there are several other players like Twitter or WhatsApp where people are engaging that are not Google platforms per se. So what's Google's strategy on that?
First, I would say that all these platforms are great, and eventually people may use more than one platform. So we're happy to see people using WhatsApp or Twitter as second screen as well. So no problem there. As long as the user is happy, we're happy. What is important here is that we understood that first, users are global at this point, and you do not need to live in Madrid to be a fan of Real Madrid.
Yeah.
Actually, the fans of the Manchester United, less than 5% live in Manchester.
Exactly.
So that was an example that I brought there.
Yeah.
So that realization, for me, triggered the need to help here in Brazil, because our kids are growing thinking about Barcelona, Real Madrid, Milan, not necessarily about the teams in our cities, in our country here. So the best way for us to create a better experience is to understand the user first, understand that globalization trend happens in many industries, and if we want to be competitive in Brazil for our local sports clubs, we need to make sure they are using their digital assets to the most. And that means to understand the value of each player, to understand the value of the brand of the team, to understand how to create this model of interaction with fans, which is much more than just a passive audience watching a soccer game, or sometimes establish a two-way dialogue rather than what happens in traditional television, because people watch a game. So they watch a game, but they would like to have input, they would like to establish a connection with the players, which are the stars, or with the teams. And it's amazing when we think about stars like Neymar, that has 100 million followers, be that on Facebook or on Instagram or on the social networks or on Twitter or on YouTube. These players, each of them has a strategy on the platform, but the reality is that users are thirsty for information, and they are thirsty for interaction, and they will interact in different platforms according to their passions and with their preferences.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do at Google is to help clubs and athletes to get that digital strategy right, which is the same thing that we do for publishers. In the past, you had newspapers that were only physical newspapers, print newspapers. We're trying to help them to use their assets, which is the journalists, the distribution models that they have, to use our platform so they can be up to their best. And in order to do that, there's 1 billion people, almost 2 billion people every day searching for stuff, searching for the game that will happen tomorrow, which players will be playing, who is the new revelation, which is the new player, which is sort of rising in Europe or in Brazil. So people want to get information, they're thirsty for that. And we think that we need to make sure that we capture that opportunity and we create that good content and make that connection for players, clubs, and fans.
Yeah, and another thing that actually I would like to say is a testimony, because in fact Google goes, I think, much beyond that, the contents part only, in terms of how it impacts people's sort of lives in other ways around sports. The Google Translate in Russia, it was amazing. How it facilitated lives there. It works super well. What was sort of the feedback that you guys had here? I suppose you were very happy with that.
Well, yeah.
It's working incredibly well.
Google products, the idea is that they have to pass what we call the toothbrush test, which is they need to be used by more than 1 billion people 3 times a day. So when we create a solution, be that a search engine, a map, a browser, a video platform, does it work for 1 billion people? Does it have the potential to work for 1 billion people? Yes. Are they going to use it often, many times during the day? Yes. So it's something worth making an investment. Maps was awesome in Russia. It's pretty important. We were there for I was there for 2 weeks. We were there for more than that. It's amazing how people, those products, they become utilities. They are part of your life. The translator is something, the Google Translate was something I was like, oh my God, this stuff works.
Every taxi driver
had it.
Had it. You would just speak to that, and it worked incredibly well.
So I think that's the magic of this place here of Google, is that the resolve, the purpose of this company is, let's create product that will be embedded in people's lives and will make a difference. And they make a difference for 1 billion plus people. Translate was great. Maps was awesome. The search engine was fantastic for people, and that's why we're pretty happy with these events like the World Cup on the platforms, on the technology side. And of course, there is a long runway for Google and for YouTube to get into the content side, where we can help FIFA and many other companies that they own the assets, to be a partner for broadcasting those eventually in the future.
And let me ask you, what's the importance of live sports nowadays against, let's say, VOD? Is it something that are we becoming a generation of highlight consumers, or is it still sort of a king live sports? How the NBA, for instance, just now a few weeks ago released a new package of their League Pass, where now fans can sign up to watch only the fourth quarter of the game, because they want to attract now the new generation, the millennials that wouldn't spend an hour and a half or 2 hours watching a game, so they're selling only that. So what's the relevance of live against VOD?
Well, that question is great, and we can answer this so many ways. I think no one out there knows the real answer for that question. Reality is that we're living with people that are much less inclined to watch long programs. So short forms are becoming something more relevant. However, live sports is still a big thing, and it's a big thing for television, because what is not live on television, if you think about the basis of television, what is the anchors of audience today are live sports, live events, news, and here in Brazil still some soap operas that people can watch later
Delayed,
if
yeah.
they want. They want delay. They can watch on demand. Reality is that in that scenario, sports become even more important for television, for traditional broadcasting. We at Google believe that live sports is important, but there will be a generation of people that will be willing to watch just the compact, or they'll be multitasking, doing three things at a time. That's what drove the rising of the second screen or the third screen. People are doing 2-3 things at a time, which is okay as well. Specifically on the question on the fourth quarter games, what if you buy a game and the game is already 75-40? Very rarely that fourth quarter will be relevant, because the game will be pretty much defined. So yeah, that's a format. There will be other format, like people only buy the highlights, or people will be but there's an audience for everything. But I still think that live events, live sports are and will continue to be important for many years. There is no way, because they also drive something a little different, which is they drive conversations, that the Monday morning conversations that happen after a Sunday game, but that cannot be only that. It needs to be live sports, but then all the discussions that happen after the game, for those that want to consume after the game, people that want to have a deep down on what happens in the locker rooms, or understanding the comments and what was the reaction of the players and of the coach after the game. All these things are so important that the purpose is to have an experience that is not only the live, but it's the pre, it's the during, and it's the after the game. We need to look at the experience in this way, and we need to look at the experience not only as a one-way live thing. It's a live for a moment, but there's a lot of things that happen before and after that they required a very customized view, or at least to have abundance of content, so people can curate what they want to watch and what they want to read about it.
Oh, but talking about the live sports specifically, we see Amazon and we see Facebook moving in that direction, acquiring important rights, whether it's tennis, whether it's football, including in Latin America now with Facebook. Is Google moving in that direction, acquiring rights as well? Is it part of the strategy?
Yeah, we evaluate acquiring rights. It doesn't mean that we have to acquire rights at any cost. The reality is that for traditional broadcasting, they have these long contracts which become the anchors of the rest of their programming, and that's okay. It works for them. And you have that negotiated with the large companies like Globo, which is a very good media company in Brazil, for example. There will be one day that there will be an opportunity for the big entities like FIFA to negotiate a global deal with companies like Google or Facebook or Amazon or any of them. What is best, to have a global deal or to have a bunch of local deals depending on the market? I think for us, that market, that timing is not there yet. So, of course, we'll look at opportunities. Well, we broadcast Series C on YouTube. Series C is the minor league in Brazil, the third soccer league in Brazil, and the games have a lot of people watching that, either live or later. But it doesn't mean that we need to make a huge investment for Series A, for the top league in Brazil, because that's not ready for monetization at this point. I think the discussion needs to be based on monetization potential and costs that are willing to invest in comparison to what traditional broadcasting companies can do today, which the power of these companies today may not be the same power of negotiation 5 years down the road.
You have cases today like the case of Facebook in India with the La Liga rights. They bought the rights there, and then they resold to the previous broadcaster that's used to show that as well. So they have the rights for Facebook and also made available on TV. You mentioned that there is a possibility of you take the rights of the World Cup. I don't know if they're going to be valued $5 billion or $6 or $7 billion in a few years' time. But do you see a company like Google or Facebook or Amazon, one of these giants, in one go paying sort of all that, and then because they have the means to just distribute it globally?
Absolutely. I'm not sure if that will happen in 2 World Cups or in 4 World Cups, but will happen.
Okay.
The reality is that these companies can do so much more with data, and in terms of understanding the full event and understanding how they can make that a multi-platform experience, that can be shared with a TV or can go alone independent in the future. I'm talking about Facebook, about Amazon, or about Google, or about anyone else that has the muscle to speak to billions of people. These companies can get there, and I think they will get there at the right moment, at the right cost.
And what about the esports phenomenon? That is something that is growing a lot. We saw that in Russia as well, and we've been seeing sort of every day. And YouTube recently announced, I think the closing of YouTube gaming app. But I think you have a new sort of strategy in place for that sort of a gaming and esports platform. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
That's recent news. I'm not allowed to talk too much about that, but the reality on the sports, the esports, is that's a huge market. And that's a huge market that we need to look with a lot of attention, not only because it has an opportunity to monetize as it becomes more professionalized, or the players become idols, or as we have a generation of kids that are engaging with esports, but also because we need to look at how esports and traditional sports coexist, right? And that coexistence is not. I'm not denying the opportunity that we can make these two things come together in the future. We don't know yet exactly how to make it come together, but certainly there is an opportunity there.
Okay, Fabio, we're about to finish the interview. I want to, of course, to thank you for receiving us here at your office in São Paulo. But before we do, maybe some other tips and advice, maybe very shortly, that we can give to our audience. Is there a book that you would recommend for people that are starting their career now that I think was important for you? That's or a book or a YouTube channel for professionals?
Well, for me, the best book I've read on business is a very simple one. It's from a former boss that I had when I worked at AT&T. It was called Obstacles Welcome. It's about Ralph de la Vega. He was CEO for AT&T for some years. He was born in Cuba, and he was sent to the U.S. His parents were refugees from Cuba. When he was 7 years old, he was allowed to leave Cuba during the Fidel regime. And the reality is that his parents couldn't make it because their paperwork was not right. So he had to go to the U.S. by himself when he was 7 years old, and he lived without his family with some friends of his parents for 5 years. And that kid, he shares a lot of lessons on how to deal with obstacles, which I believe is important today, is really to understand how to overcome obstacles and difficulties. So Ralph de la Vega, Obstacles Welcome, very good book.
We're going to put that in the description of the video.
Yeah.
Is there a quote, a motto, or a life career advice that you received that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I lived 10 years in the U.S. and I had 2 bosses that I really remember fondly on career advices. One of them was Ralph de la Vega on this understanding how to overcome obstacles. And the second one was an amazing guy. His name is Ike Harris. Ike Harris was a former football player. He was a wide receiver that became a CFO and became a CEO. Today he's the chairman of Cigna, the insurance company. iCarries is a 6'6" African American that was able to work well both worlds, the world of sports and the world of business. And he had a lot of tips about this, but one of the things that he always kept saying, even when we had our hardest time, was winners make adjustments, not excuses.
Winners make adjustments, not excuses.
So that was like his motto. And of course, being a Brazilian living in the US and understanding how to sort of be a business leader in a different culture, for me that was a pretty important message that drove all my entire conduct and to create a winning team in the US, and later I brought it back here to Brazil.
That's powerful. Thank you so much. I think it's a great way to wrap up. And
thank you.
Thank you so much for having us here. Talking to YouTube, this is the first iWorkinSport interview. It was a pleasure and an honor really to talk to Fabio Coelho, president of president of Google Brazil and VP at Google Inc. If you liked the interview, please give the thumbs up there, the like button. There's a bell sign in the YouTube channels, right? So please mark that as well. And if you think that's relevant to you, to your friends, please share it as well.
And subscribing the channel.
Subscribing the channel, exactly. Click subscribe. It's great that I'm starting with the president of Google who's helping me out. I couldn't have a better teacher.
Leave your likes, subscribe to the channel, try to get the message every time you put a video there, so they'll get a message, an email saying.
Exactly. Comments. Tell us what's your thoughts of the interview. Thanks a lot, Fabio.
Thank you.
It was excellent. So I hope you liked this first interview with Fabio Coelho. I'd like to thank Fabio for hosting me at Google's headquarters in São Paulo, Brazil. And I would like to thank you for watching. And if you did like, please leave that mark that like button below. Share it with your friends. Do all that Fabio told you to do at the end of the video. Please leave your comments. That would be super important for me. I know there's a lot to improve for the next ones. Let me know who would you like me to interview next. And I hope to see you soon next time.